This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Starting today's show is K-State Extension swine specialist Joel DeRouchey and K-State swine PhD student Ethan Stas as they explain their recent research in feeding wheat to pigs. Dennis Carlson, Assistant Fire Management Officer with the Kansas Forest Service, keeps the show rolling with reminders about managing fire risk on operations. He discusses a few things to do to mitigate the risk, but also what to do if a fire ignites. To end today's show, K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk says the milk production trends across the U.S. show that the hard work dairy producers have been putting into their operation is paying off. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Tuesday show talking about feeding wheat to pigs with K-State Extension swine specialist Joel DeRouchey and K-State swine PhD student Ethan Stas. Joel, Ethan, I appreciate you both taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having us in, Shelby.
Yep. Glad to be here.
Joel, as we're talking about feeding wheat to pigs, some recent research has been done, and can you share with us the purpose and why this took place?
Yeah, what our goal was with this overall project was to really provide swine producers, feed millers, as well as those selling and marketing wheat with updated information to help value wheat in swine diets more appropriately. Clearly, it's not new that wheat is fed to swine. This has been going on since wheat varieties were developed. But what we wanted to do was get a summary of recent information, really over the last 10 years, to show the current value of it in these swine diets to help out that group of clientele.
And who are some major contributors to making this happen?
We did this in partnership with Kansas Wheat, helped fund this research, and really what the outputs are was a series of short fact sheets in different areas on feeding wheat and nutritional values, as well as utilizing off-quality wheat, because as some of that wheat is not of the quality to use in the milling side for human consumption, it can work still really well in livestock diets. And so we put together a series of these fact sheets, as well as a full literature review that'll be published that has all that information in one publication directly.
And pulling out some of those topics from those fact sheets to talk about. And first, we need to talk about energy and how wheat contributes to energy.
Previous literature suggested that wheat was, on average, around 92% of the energy relative to corn. And from our research and what we've done with this project, we found some more recent research that suggests that energy might be a bit higher in wheat compared to corn. What we found is it looks like it's around 98 to 99% of the energy of corn. So higher in energy, which wheat being a cereal grain, that's what it's used for in swine diets is energy. So that finding was really interesting and provides updated reference for swine producers and nutritionists across the industry.
And wheat's energy level being higher than other cereal grains, correct?
Yes, typically higher than other cereal grains such as sorghum and barley, but still a bit lower than corn, but still higher in energy than what was previously found in more of outdated research.
And are there sometimes the co-products of wheat that can also be used?
Yep. So another interesting finding from what we found is digging into the co-products. So from the flour milling industry, there's various wheat co-products that can be produced. Wheat bran, wheat middlings, wheat mill run, wheat shorts, and wheat red dog. And basically, it's all dependent on the amount of bran, endosperm, and germ from the wheat kernel that gets added back to produce those co-products. So, for instance, your wheat bran is going to be your highest fiber co-product just because it has the most bran and outer coating component, whereas wheat shorts and wheat red dog are going to be a bit higher in energy just because they have more of that endosperm and starch components added back. But typically here in the U.S. and in the Midwest, the most common co-product that would be utilized is wheat middlings. So we provide some updated nutrient specifications for wheat middlings that can be found in this project as well.
this information worldwide application of it?
Yes, this was research that was not only research in the U.S., but also worldwide. So depending on what co-products or whatever may be used in swine diets, it can be applied across the entire world, not just the Midwest and the U.S. as well.
As we're thinking about then diets for livestock, but specifically today looking at pigs, something really important, protein.
Yeah, along with the energy value that Ethan talked about, as the protein in wheat is a highly digestible protein for swine. In addition, wheat is higher in protein than other cereal grains, particularly corn and milo. So what happens there is as we include more wheat into the diet, we actually reduce the amount of other protein or amino acid sources, and that's primarily soybean meal. So part of the economics of utilizing wheat is that it helps offset the cost of soybean meal in particular. And one of the other things, it's also higher in phosphorus. And so in almost all livestock diets, we include supplemental phosphorus, such as monocalcium phosphate, to meet the needs of those growing or reproductive animals. And by it containing more phosphorus than other cereal grains, we actually decrease the amount of supplemental phosphorus that's needed, which again helps in the economics of using wheat in these swine diets.
So wheat is not a one-to-one exchange with corn in a swine diet.
That's exactly right. And so really the trade-off becomes it contains higher amounts of protein or amino acids as well as phosphorus. So thus we decrease the amount of soybean meal as well as monocalcium phosphate. So it is not a substitution one-to-one. We need to really reformulate the diets to get the maximum economic return when using wheat.
Wheat can be combined then into a pellet, and so how does wheat contribute to helping make that pellet form?
Yeah, one of the really unique aspects of wheat and the gluten and really the starch component of wheat is it acts really as a very strong pellet binder. And what I really mean by that is for the feed mills that are making a pelleted product, and this is again across all species, for if you're making cow cubes or cattle supplements, oftentimes wheat or wheat co-products such as wheat middlings are used to really give that pellet a more dense, firmer structure. And thus we have less fines and less breakage off that. And that helps to decrease the amount of wastage once we feed those that feed stuff. So really an advantage in where a lot of mills use even a 10% wheat or 10 to 20% wheat middlings to improve pellet quality. That's a really unique and important aspect of wheat products.
And as we're talking about wheat, not all wheat is the same, and one way it can be different is test weights.
Yes. So one thing that we found with this research is oftentimes wheat can be utilized in the human food industry for flour milling, but sometimes we run into some adverse weather conditions and some stress that can be put on that plant that can result in off-quality wheat. And really, two of the main focuses on off-quality wheat are low test weight and sprouted wheat. Low test weight wheat, from what we found, is based on the pounds of wheat per bushel. And what we found is once you reach about 51 pounds per bushel, that's where we start considering low test weight wheat, and that's where the energy content of that wheat starts to diminish. So ultimately incorporating wheat with a test weight of 51 pounds per bushel or less is going to result in some growth performance differences in those pigs. So really the project gives an overview of the change in energy content of that wheat and what growth performance changes you can expect in the pigs from feeding low test weight wheat.
Yeah, and as Ethan talked on this low test weight, part of the reason that we have a lower pigs will grow slower or have worse feed conversion in light test weight wheat is there's simply less starch. And when there's less starch, there's less energy. And so, again, those kernels just don't fill out to maximum size, and thus we can utilize it that way. But, again, still a very good product to be used in the livestock side, and we just have to account for the potential of a little bit of a loss of performance. As you talked about, sprouted wheat is the other one, and that really occurs once we get once the wheat is mature, ready to be harvested, but we start to get rain on it, and it actually starts to sprout in the beard or in the kernels. And so then when that occurs, oftentimes that wheat is not eligible to be used in the wheat processing for human consumption, and that gets shifted to livestock. Sprouted wheat, when ground, still has a high nutritional value. We can find that, in fact, pigs do very well on it at lower levels. If we do a complete replacement of the cereal grain utilizing sprouted wheat, we can then start to reduce performance from a lower energy because it uses some of that starch and energy in that kernel itself for once it resprouts on itself. But again, provides livestock producers and the swine producers a good opportunity to utilize as an economical cereal grain source on sprouted wheat.
When might a swine producer want to integrate wheat into their swine's diet?
Swine producers will start to integrate wheat when it really starts to become economical. And this time of year with the harvest that's going on in Kansas and the Midwest is really the time where that new wheat price starts to become a more established relative to corn primarily or milo, depending on the grain source that they're using. And so really wheat can be priced at approximately 107, 108% of corn. And that's when it starts to become economical into the swine diet. And so, and oftentimes, too, it's not an all or nothing. We have many producers that will use partial wheat with corn or milo. And so, again, it just doesn't have to be a full replacement, although that does certainly occur depending on the mill and the capabilities of a producer utilizing that on a grain storage basis.
If people are wanting to find out more information about this, how can they do that?
We have all the fact sheets are available at our KSUSwine.org website. We have a swine nutrition guide, and those fact sheets are listed in that area. Or they can certainly, all of our contact information is listed on KSUSwine.org and can reach out directly, and if we can get any of that information from those fact sheets and provide them directly to anybody who would like.
Joel, Ethan, I appreciate you both taking the time to join us today and share with us some information about feeding wheat to pigs.
Thank you for having us on.
Yep, thank you very much.
That was K-State Extension swine specialist Joel DeRouchey and K-State swine PhD student Ethan Stas. I will link these fact sheets in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking about managing fire risk on the farm. And then to talk about it, we're joined by Assistant Fire Management Officer with the Kansas Forest Service, Dennis Carlson. Dennis, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Dennis, before we talk about all the different fire risks that farmers and ranchers should probably be thinking about or just have in mind, first off, making sure where they are or where that fire risk could be is able to be accessed.
Yeah, it's always good to know, have that information, especially when we start looking at response of our volunteer fire departments and our full-time paid departments, exactly what the location, whether it's your address, cross-section on the streets, and knowing all that as you're working out in these areas.
And as people could be at home and have their house there, or it's a real facility, making sure it's marked so people can find it?
Yeah, that is always one interesting thing. A lot of times, I always recommend people have their houses marked, whether that's a placard right along the road, especially if they have a driveway going in. And the reason for that is on some of our large fires that we've had in the past, you get a lot of mutual aid. So the people coming in from out of county. So those individuals, that work in the county, they know basically where everybody lives, but as we get other people coming in, they're unfamiliar with that area. So if they're called to a certain location or certain address, making sure that those are marked, that they know exactly where they're going.
And also making sure that big equipment sometimes can fit through where it needs to go.
Yeah, that's always one thing we always see is, a lot of people, we do like to, make our driveways look presentable, a lot of trees and all this stuff along there. But we also have to remember that we have to get large fire engines down there. So, that 13-foot of clearance, to the above you and 13 feet of clearance to the sides is really important, making sure that we can get those responding engines into those locations.
You mentioned trees, but also keeping in mind those electrical power lines.
Yeah, electrical power lines are, especially once we get onto the farm. There's many farms, depending on how large or what kind of equipment they use on the farm. But some of our smaller farms, we see those power power lines hanging really low. And that just presents that another obstacle, getting engines and responding units into those locations.
Dennis, our goal is obviously to hopefully just avoid having to even have the fire department come to our house or our farm. So thinking about a few things that could be creating some of those risks of fire. And the first one to mention, extension cords.
Yeah, extension cords, and it takes me back to when I was a kid on the farm and using our really old extension cords, out to the grain dryers and other things. And I didn't know a lot back then, but now the more I know, the more I cringe. Certain extension cords, making sure that they're rated for the amperage that we're pulling, because I've seen a lot of times you have smaller extension cords that really are pulling way too many amps that heat up and can cause issues.
And is that reading the packaging, or is there a way you can see that on the extension cord if they get mixed up?
Typically, it's depending on how old the extension cord is. But, a lot of it you can tell by the packaging and those type of things.
And a staple many places, burn barrels or even burn piles?
Yeah, making sure that we have good, nothing that can burn around our burn barrel. Selecting when we're doing that is really key. Certainly not dry, windy days is always, causes that we run into issues. Burn piles, we run into, when we look at burn piles, especially, our brush piles, that kind of stuff. I like to recommend thinking about May or June to take care of those. And the reason for that is everything around them is green, and it makes it much easier. And there's a lot of things you can do to treat, that immediate area, get those fuels removed away from those burn piles just so that they won't spark out. And a lot of it is also stirring those burn piles. A lot of people will light a burn pile and just leave. Well, not necessarily, but just not do anything with it. And what happens over time is it burns down, the ashes start to smolder, make the pile smolder. So it goes into a really long burn period. I've seen burn piles come alive weeks and weeks after they've been ignited, and they thought, well, they're out. And that's because the wind moves around the ash and then finds the pockets and they get going again. So stirring them really helps consume that and get that consumed up.
A reminder just to keep your eye on things, and also important to keep your eye open when you're welding.
Yeah, welding, especially a lot of times, welding around the farm. Also, when we're out building fence, it's always good to have that extra person there with a fire extinguisher just in case something goes wrong or goes south on you.
And right now it's hay season. A lot of people are out in their fields for various reasons besides just hay, but really keeping in mind the dangers there can be with hay. Yeah,
hay, a lot of we've ran some fires on haying equipment, bearings go out, those type of things. So just, number one, having a fire extinguisher there, knowing how to quickly unhook your equipment from that baler is always key within that. And, just monitoring, especially our equipment, if it's starting to get hot, then start making those repairs before we start running into issues.
And is there sometimes just the smallest spark can create a big fire?
Yep, a lot of times, especially in our, when we got our haying, because we're haying it with, when it's dry, and grass or our fine fuels easily catch.
And as we're thinking about hay, not only getting it out of the field, but once it gets put in the barn, what are those concerns?
Yeah, one thing, and it's always good to, look at a lot of the K-State publications on haying, and especially monitoring the temperatures within those bales. Sometimes if we get those bales hayed when it's a little bit too wet, just the microbial activity in there causes them to heat up. And within those publications, it starts giving you those danger zones, and being able to, have a probe, check the heat of those bales, and making sure that they're staying within the reason that you have. And, when we start stacking and those type of things, it depends on the amount of room you get. But I've been on several hay fires where all the entire season of hay is in one big, long pile. And if one of them catches, it seems like pretty much the entire pile is going to go, because it takes really heavy equipment to move that out and get it extinguished. So, if you do have enough room, can I create smaller and separate them just in case something does happen?
Besides doing the preventative work, what should farmers do if it does catch on fire, unfortunately?
If it does catch on fire, a lot of it is going to be, number one, fire department there, and it's going to require heavy equipment to remove that and try to unroll and get that stuff extinguished.
And thinking about what farmers should maybe have in their toolkit when it comes time, really all the time, for fire risk, what is the first thing that you want producers to have with them?
I always like to make sure we have fire extinguishers, and that even includes down to ATVs and UTVs. And some people say, well, gosh, that kind of is a little odd, but we've seen ATVs just out in the pasture. If they malfunction, something happens, just being able to have a fire extinguisher there, just knock something down if something does happen.
Before the interview, you mentioned also that you might want producers to have a lighter with them.
Yeah, that does sound really odd. And the reason, and talking a lot of some of our big ranchers in some of the areas, they do carry lighters, and it sounds a little get But the reason they do that is if they're out there working in the pasture, especially the early springtime when everything is really, really dry, and if they do get in a spot where a wildfire is approaching them and they can't escape, then what do? Then is actually take that lighter and light down about 10, 12 feet along the ground, let that fire just go, and then step in the black once it cools down, because now you have unburned material around you.
Not mentioning that people should be doing this really a last resort.
This is very last resort. And usually when we're working in our pastures during that time frame, just always keeping in the back of your mind, if something were to go wrong, or, something in this case, can I quickly maybe go to a pond? Can I go to an area that the cattle have basically made void of vegetation, such as tanks, water tanks, those kind of facilities? Just keeping that stuff in the back of your mind as we're working in those areas.
Important to also think that while the fire at one point, if something does accidentally catch on fire, even if the farmer thinks they might be able to get it taken care of, just go ahead and call the fire department.
Yes, it's better to call early and then you get it out and then they can be disregarded. But it's always best that they're started on the way, because our response times, depending on where you're in the country, it could be 15 minutes. Who knows? So calling them right away, and then get them on the road.
Do you have any recommendations of materials that people should look at, Dennis?
Yeah, some of the materials, of course, we talked a little bit about some of the KSU publications on bales, those type of things. The other one I really like to encourage people to look at is our Ready, Set, Go publication. It's through the Forest Service. It's on Kansas State University's website through Extension. And it gives you a little bit of hints what you can do around the farm, especially around your house, as far as clearing vegetation and those type of things. If in a fortunate event a wildfire were to come, something that would help reduce the risk around your structures.
Dennis, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you very much.
That was Assistant Fire Management Officer with the Kansas Forest Service, Dennis Carlson. In today's show notes on agtoday.net, you will be finding a few different links. The first one will be to the Ready, Set, Go publication that Dennis mentioned in today's show. If you'd like to find it for yourself, you can go to kansasforest.org. There will also be a link to a publication from the K-State Research and Extension Bookstore that involves the control and prevention of hay fires. You can find that by yourself and find other informational publications from K-State Research and Extension by going to Bookstore.KSRE.ksu.edu. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you ahead.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's Milk Lines. The trends in milk production across the United States, especially in fat and protein production, shows that the hard work dairy producers have been putting into their operations is paying off. K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk says that producers are continuing to see the 300-pound increase in milk production per year per cow that's been occurring over the last 4 decades.
Today, as I visit with our Kansas dairy producers, just want to say hats off to all of you for the excellent job that you continue to do on each of your individual dairy farms. As we look across the United States and we look to see what's happening in our trends in milk production and fat and protein production across the United States, it's actually really quite impressive. Over the last 40 years, milk production has tended to rise just a little over 300 pounds per year per cow. This is very, very impressive and shows that we are really trying to increase the efficiency of our dairy operations across the board. So all the hard work that you put in every day on your farms is really paying off. One of the important things that I see as I look at trends is what's happening with the production of milk solids, particularly fat and protein. As we look at how our dairy market has changed over the past several decades, there's been more of a focus on increasing the amount of fat and protein that is utilized for the manufacture of dairy products. Less emphasis on the amount that's utilized in fluid milk consumption, and you have responded very well. If we look back over the last 13, 14 years, there's been a tremendous increase in not only the percentage of fat and protein found in the milk that's going into the raw milk supply, but also the total pounds produced. Actually, when we look at the 40-year trend on fat and protein-corrected milk production, that trend is actually about 313 pounds per year. So it's actually greater than the trend for actual milk production. So again, very excellent job as we look at what we're doing in terms of genetics as well as feeding and management and care of our animals on our dairy farms. Truly, these animals are athletes, and you're doing a very excellent job of keeping those athletes healthy and producing. As we move forward, I think it's important that we continue to remember that these trends will likely continue. So on your individual dairy farms, it's important that you continue to emphasize what you're doing with genetics as well as nutrition and management of animals to ensure that you keep up with the trends of the industry. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, extending a hats off to all of our dairy farms for the excellent job that they do in the care of their animals and the production trends that we are seeing as a result of that.
Thanks, Mike. And while we have a moment, USDA's latest outlook for milk production, trade, and prices shows similar month-over-month upward trends. Rod Bain has more.
Most of the moves made by USDA in the June dairy production, supply and demand, and price forecast reflected upward trends. World Agricultural Outlook Board Chair Mark Jekanowski.
U.S. milk production virtually unchanged for both 2024 and 2025 this month. Some offsets there. Trade in products, our fat basis imports raised this month. And then on the other hand, on the fat basis, we raised our export forecast.
The forecasted higher milk prices by category and class for June look like this.
All of our primary product prices this month relative to last month for both 2024 and 2025. So cheese, butter, non-fat, dry milk, dry whey prices all showing some strength with those higher prices. Class prices increased as well.
With the all-milk price forecast raised from the previous month, 40 cents for this year, 60 cents for 2025. Yet year-over-year still down 1 dime at $21.50 per hundredweight. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.